Welcome to the 13th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. It's your producer, Katie, here, and this episode has been edited to reflect our new name. If you're new to the Animal Riot community, welcome, and you can find out more about us at animalriotpress.com. Now on to the episode with your hosts, Brian Birnbaum, and today's guests, George Sawaya and Jared Pollen.
I'm your host, Brian Birnbaum. We're here today with Dead Rabbits OGs. George, as you know, is a poet and fiction writer from Alabama. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Okay, good. That was indeed a call and response. And you guys complied brilliantly. The state knows what's best. Please comply. Anyway, George and Jared are joining me to talk about Jared's forthcoming collection, Unified Field of Loneliness, which will be coming out with Crowsnest. It's their debut publication, which is an offshoot of Political Animal online. They're just online, Jared, right? Political Animal. Okay, yeah, they're an online journal. And today's brand of fuckery is brought to you by Surviving Vyvanse, which I took for the first time yesterday at 7:30 in the morning and did not stop feeling it until today when I woke up, which is a little too long, in my opinion. More reports later. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's get back on
to the floor.
Let's get back on brand. There's no amphetamine use in Jared's collection, so let's talk about some other things like Jared's collection.
Yeah, well, it's the Unified Field of Loneliness.
The Unified.
Yeah,
wow! I forgot a very important article, and that's upsetting.
We got a definite article.
Maybe we'll go back and edit that. Maybe we'll just keep it real and just let human flaws shine through. So yeah, let's talk about like where you started with this, or I don't know. Let's go back further. Farther. Do you want to start with like your writing process and like where you came from as a writer?
Yeah, sure.
Kate, our producers just signed to me. Let's start with his birth.
Okay.
Which is probably worse than starting like a novel with like I woke up. though I will say
it's worse than waking up from a dream.
Yeah, right.
At the beginning of a story.
It's funny. Coincidentally, I saw Seth the other day. Seth Katz, we'll have him on sometime. A fellow Sarah Lawrence grad, and he was reading The World According to Garp. And that book actually, I think, starts with him being born. And honestly, I just don't know how you get away with something like that, but he did. Anyway, Jared's book does not start with someone being born or waking up. So, yeah, let's start with something else.
Well, I started writing shortly after I finished undergrad. Actually, while I was in school, I didn't have much interest in being a fiction writer. I'd always loved reading, and I thought maybe the only writing I would ever do was in journalism. At that time, I was more interested in becoming a political journalist because I studied poli-sci and I studied English lit. And I thought that was a good way to fuse the two things that I had studied in school and try to parlay that into some kind of career. But after doing just a bit of journalism work for the school newspaper, I very quickly discovered that it was something that I absolutely did not want to do, and that I didn't have the level of freedom that I really wanted out of writing. And so around the time that I was graduating from undergrad, I
actually do want to ask you a question real quick about that. Was it because like you had to follow a narrative based on facts? Was that like merely it, or was it something internal to the actual school journal?
No, it's not because it was constrained to facts per se. I mean, I do write a lot of essays and get a lot of joy out of writing them.
Right.
It was more stylistic guidelines. It was more the dictates of any journalism standard. George, having probably done some journalism work, probably knows this as well. Most of your readers read at like a 10th grade level. You're discouraged from using the personal pronoun, first person pronoun.
Right.
You're discouraged from using certain things stylistically. You're discouraged from going on tangents. You're discouraged from using certain kind of language and certain kinds of imagery.
So not just facts, but the narrative is very narrow.
Yeah.
So it's narrowed. Okay.
Yeah. And
anyways,
the journalism work that I did, I already got a glimpse into the trench work of what that's like, going to meet someone and then interviewing them and then transcribing the interview and then going back and writing 800 words and then having it cut down to 600 words. And then the stuff that got cut out was the stuff that I thought maybe was the most significant or the most important. And then it running like in the school newspaper, which nobody read anyway. And so the whole experience was very unsatisfying and very disenchanting.
Yeah.
Fiction to me always seemed like pure freedom. So shortly after I graduated and I was confronted with that adult question of what am I going to do with the rest of my life, it seemed to me like giving this fiction writing thing would be the best possible course of action. So this was the summer of 2012, and the applications for Sarah Lawrence were due. The applications for all grad programs, including Sarah Lawrence, were due that December.
That fall.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think it was December 31st of that year.
And we are circa Kobe Bryant tearing his Achilles in the timeline of his career.
Just to give us,
just
to give our listeners
some context.
Yeah. So this,
we applied that fall, and then we heard back that spring.
Yeah,
that's right.
So this would have been the summer of 2012 when I graduated, and at that time I'd never written a story. Never written anything seriously. I dabbled in poetry a bit when I was an undergrad, and it was all shit for the most part. It was derivative, mythopoetic, like, T.S. Eliot kind of poetry.
At least you can admit it. At least you can admit it, man.
So, but I'd never written a story with any conviction before. I'd never written any piece of fiction, long form fiction, seriously before. So I had about 6 months to teach myself how to write a good enough story to get into a program like Sarah Lawrence. And I think I wrote 2 or 3 stories in that interim. And the last one that I wrote, I submitted, and it was accepted. And then we started the following year in September. So it all happened very quickly, actually. By the time I was getting ready to apply to programs, I had, literally no experience writing fiction. So whether it was a stroke of luck or some demonstration of early talent, I don't know. But I managed to get into the program, and that was the first hurdle, the first confidence boost. And then by the time I was leaving that program 2 years later, I had half of this collection assembled, and I knew that I was in it for the long haul, that this was not just like a pipe dream or a passing fancy, that this is really what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And if I'm just going to interject and mention that, at the beginning of that program, you were like the first person I had ever, I think you were the first person I really talked to. We were sitting out on that lawn and like this orientation party.
That's right. And we were
talking about metaphysics or something. And then a couple of days later, I don't know if you had met George by that point, but I think it's funny. You should talk about you guys meeting, because you guys are basically, like demographically, like, fairly opposite in a way, at least for Westerners,
Yeah, well,
no, I was there. I was there when y'all met. I'm glad I was so memorable. But we actually walked up to the campus together, Jared and I, because he just moved in, like a week before?
Yeah, I moved in the last week of August, and I had very little communication with George before I moved out. Unlike everybody else, I didn't go to Sarah Lawrence to kind of scout, the school and the program and see what the faculty was like. I wanted to get out of Windsor so bad that I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to go. I don't care what it's like.
Anywhere but here.
Yeah, anywhere but here. So I moved in not really having had a lot of contact with George. I think I sent him one email and I said, like, what's the house look like? And he wrote, like, it's all right. And that was pretty much it.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
It's all right. Hyphen Roll Tide.
And I have to,
but people should also know that Windsor is like, you can see Detroit like across what is it? What lake separates you guys?
The Detroit River.
It's the Detroit River. Never mind.
Yeah,
okay,
Windsor.
Yeah. I just think it's important.
Yeah, Windsor
to know.
Yeah, Windsor straddles the right side of the Detroit River. If I stand on my back deck, I can see the Ambassador Bridge and the Renaissance Center. So
you're like an American emeritus or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I grew up on America's doorstep, and I was conscious of the fact that I wasn't American, but I always felt much closer to America spiritually and intellectually than I did to my home country. And Windsor's kind of a weird place because it's so close to the United States. People use Fahrenheit instead of Celsius. Some people use feet instead of centimeters. Some people use miles per hour instead of kilometers. Things like that. People usually watch the American news to get their weather. There's only one. There's only one Canadian station on TV. It is kind of like a weird sort of
that is strange
American bubble inside of Canada.
Interesting. Okay, so you graduate as we all did somehow, despite the tomfuckery that took place at 25 Stillwell, where you and George moved in. And so you had half the collection, and then what happened after that?
Well, I wrote a novel. And then 1 or 2 stories were written during breaks that I took while I was writing the novel. And then the last 4 stories were written in 2017. And once I had about 10 stories together, 10 seemed like a nice symmetrical number. I think story collections that have 14, 15 stories in them are too long, actually. I think a short story collection should be lean by design. And
I feel like that. I feel like you feel like that about albums too, or at least I do. Maybe I'm just projecting.
No, that's absolutely true. I have this thing with the number 10. I think all my favorite records have 10 songs on them.
So Pearl Jam 10 must be your favorite album of all time.
Must be.
I want to mention also that it's like kind of ironic because you had finished half this collection. Not like I'm not sure exactly if you had like an absolute direction, but you did write that novel, and then you got an agent for that novel, and it's been pretty difficult to find like a publisher for the book, but for the novel. But this collection kind of seemed a little bit easier to place, probably because of your relationship with Political Animal. But I don't know. It just goes to show you like we don't know what the fuck is going to happen in this writing game. You know.
That's right. So so I actually completed the novel about a year and a half before I finished the collection of stories, and then I sat on the novel for a bit while I was trying to find an agent for it. And during that time, I met Louis Slosky and Alexander Wall, who run Political Animal magazine. And they were starting a press of their own called Crowsnest Books, a literary fiction press. And they liked the essays that I'd written for them. And in my byline, my biography, I had a note in there about, that I'd had fiction published in other journals and stuff like that. And they asked if they could read the manuscript for the novel. And at that time, I wasn't willing to let the novel go quite yet because I was still looking for agents. And so I sent them the collection of stories, and they expressed interest in it, and they offered to publish it. And so that's how that came about. And that was at the beginning of 2017, and the collection is about to be published. Well, by the time this airs, it will be in the past tense. So the collection was published on March 15th. So it's being published this week at the time of speaking.
Excellent. We just moved to the fourth dimension. All right, yeah, that's very cool. Which I'm very excited about. My favorite story so far. I've only read the first few because I was gonna be a as they call it, beta reader these days. But I got pretty much like completely time fucked by starting this press and like trying to get my novel together and all this shit. So I'm really excited to read it. My favorite one so far is In a Nutshell, which is what? Is it still the second story in there?
No, that story is placed near the end of the collection now, but that was actually...
Oh, you moved
that
it.
That was one of the first stories I wrote, actually. I wrote that in the fall of 2013 at Sarah Lawrence. So that would have been like my fourth or fifth story ever.
Was that our first semester there? You said so Mary's class. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's an esoteric reference. So, yeah, talk about that story a little bit, just because I love it, and I can speak it to it a little more. We can act like it's the single off your album, 10 Redux.
Well, the In a Nutshell story was inspired by a particular voice using the second-person pronoun. Now, most of the time, like 99.9% of the time, stories told with the second-person pronoun are awful, Yeah. Stories that use...
Agreed.
Yeah, stories that use you are almost always terrible, and they feel sort of gimmicky and completely governed by style, and are usually playing games with the reader in some kind of way, and I really don't find that very interesting. So, but I heard this voice talking in my head, and it was the voice of a young boy moving out to school, very much like I was at that time.
Well, let's be clear, like an 18-year-old boy, let's not...
Right.
With all the with the climate, the climate, like with Leaving Neverland coming out, we don't want to mix our opportunities.
Right. Yeah. So no. So
I'm getting a shit look from my producers.
Let's leave Michael out of this. All right. So let's be clear. A young man. He's starting undergrad. And it's a young man from the Midwest going out to California to start school. And he's stuck in a traffic jam in his parents' car, and he's just sort of talking to himself, and he's addressing himself as we all do when we talk to ourselves in our own head, as you. There's this kind of voice in his head, and then there's the second voice that's addressing the first voice. And it was that kind of dialectic, that kind of conversation with yourself where you're addressing yourself as you. That
you or we. I would say we is sometimes used by
of course.
People. In fact, there's a character in Book of Numbers by Josh Cohen who strictly refers to himself as we.
Oh, really?
And everyone else is like a plural. It's fascinating. But anyway, that's not neither here nor there. Continue.
Right. And it's strange the way we do that, like if we drop our phone or something, we'll say like, "Oh, you idiot." And it's like, well, who are we talking to?
Yeah. Right.
Why,
exactly.
And why are we saying you? Why don't I just say like, I'm an idiot out loud? Why do I have to say you? So it just shows that there's this second voice inside our head, the second voice that addresses ourselves as you. And that was what was really intriguing to me. And that was the way into the story. And the whole story is just a sort of internal monologue of this young man talking to himself while he's stuck in traffic.
Yeah, that is my favorite story so far that I've read from it. But especially just because the voice of it, I agree with you. The second person thing can just really be a kind of like a gimmicky trope. But and I really like how you had a clearly defined reason for going into it. But I especially liked it. It kind of reminded me in a sense of like something like Forever Overhead, even though it's, Forever Overhead, I think what is that in first person?
No, Forever Overhead uses the second person, and that was actually...
Oh, it is in second person. Yeah. It reminded me of that story just in the same sense that it's a very small snapshot. Like, it's this very, like, it's this, there's hours that are going by, right?
Yeah.
And they're stuck in this traffic jam. And the story is really all like texture.
Mm-hmm.
The observations and, I guess just the perceptions that he's having are they're very rife. Like each block is like its own little story. And it's told in this way that it's like just the observation itself moves the plot. Like, there's basically no description of what's happening. It's like, this is here, this is here, this is here, this is what's happening, And Forever Overhead is kind of like that too. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you took inspiration from that story specifically, but it reminded me of that.
Actually, I felt discouraged when I started writing the story. I actually didn't want to use the second person pronoun because Forever Overhead used it. And I thought this is too close to the Forever Overhead story. Like it's going to seem like it's, derivative or something. So I nearly changed the piece and tried to do it with a first person pronoun because I wanted to distance it from the Wallace piece, but it just didn't work. And so I ultimately decided like, fuck it. I'm just going to write the story the way I imagined it. But that piece certainly was firing. And I think I brought that piece in that semester. That first semester at school, because we had to share a piece, every one of us each week, and that was the one that I brought in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're gonna get back to this. We'll talk a little bit more about the book, but I want to take a little detour, and I'm going to turn to George. I'm turning in my seat towards George. Everyone imagine me turning to George. Our producers are giving me strange looks, turning. They're finding George. They can't. Okay. Oh, she found George. Okay. George, I want both of you guys to talk about this, but I want George, through your eyes, what it was like to meet a spindly, brooding, dark-featured, but somewhat pallid, because, in Windsor, you don't get too much sun. Canadian.
Can we throw something redemptive in there, like, charming or,
Well, no, you're not, because you're not, Jared. You're a misanthrope. You're an intellectual misanthrope. That's that is charming. That's what our producers are saying. They're saying that is your charm, is how disdainful you are.
Well, George.
But anyway, George
can probably describe very well that first meeting.
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
I was
25 still well.
So
you roll up in your Jag. And it's, with the cracked windshield, that's going to be sold in a little bit so you can buy more beer for us.
Over the bridge in New Jersey. Yeah, I took that broken Jaguar over the George Washington with like no brakes.
Yeah, George is hurtling up from Alabama in the Jag, and Jared's flying in first class from Canada. No, that's not what happened. But anyway, continue.
That automobile was an ill-advised purchase. Don't buy a 2004 Jaguar.
I totally disagree.
No, it's bad stuff. It's a great looking car, but terrible underneath. It was like a Ford Taurus. Don't worry about it. No, I was stoked to meet a Canadian. That might as well have been Belarus for all I knew. I grew up. I barely poked a noggin above the Mason-Dixon for the first 25 years of my life. So getting to meet a Canadian was a great triumph. We broke each other's mold, though. Jared, of course, was expecting some slack-jawed hillbilly spitting tobacco on the stoop of the house we both shared, while I was expecting some apologetic, apoplectic, like light beer drinker, So we surprised each other, thankfully, and we were fast friends. I think not least of which because we were stuck with one another. But I think we had so much more in common than either one of us certainly thought. And to go back to Jared's collection, I mean, one of the first things that I ever read from him was In a Nutshell, which was shocking because he confessed at the time how little writing he'd actually sat down and done, and I knew he was politically minded, which was great because as he mentioned earlier, I also studied journalism, and we had certainly had that in common, and had both given up on our journalistic aspirations in favor of fiction initially, at least. So we had too much in common, in fact, and an appreciation for the amber spirits, be them Canadian or
Indeed.
Kentuckian in origin, certainly helped move things along, and just I may come off more affable, but I think I'm an equal misanthrope when all is said and done to our
you're a
Canadian
gregarious
author.
misanthrope.
I am because I like fucking with people. So if you're not interesting, I'll make you interesting one way or the other. We'll get you of use.
With enough George pours, we'll make you guys.
That's right.
Interesting.
That's right. You bet.
George, do you know I took you read you edited my novel, so you know that I took my favorite line from you. You said you were talking about boring people, and you were just like, I just want to tell him just do drugs, start doing it. Like you are not interesting enough.
You got to complicate yourself. Like you're tabula rasa right now, and you just need to sprinkle a little something onto yourself. Pick a drug. Pick reality. All right. Television.
So
it can be anything, but you need to complicate.
Yeah, complicate the narrative. Let's turn you from a John Grisham novel into a Langston Hughes poem.
Yeah, there you go.
You're
just blank space.
Someone more drug-addled.
You're camouflaging into the beige of the walls. You're gonna need to develop a little too enthusiastic of a taste for bourbon or conversation, something.
A borderline problematic
yes,
drinking
absolutely.
habit.
Yes.
Well, those were two things that George and I really shared with each other when we lived together. Like he said, I think we both expected the absolute worst of each other. I was expecting some like knuckle-dragging, red state, Cro-Magnon male. and I think
Cro-Magnon, that's a compliment.
Yeah, and I think he summed up the archetypical Canadian pretty well. I can't improve on that, so I won't try. But
yeah, that is true. It's true.
But when I yes.
But when did you guys realize? At what moment? So you move in, and at what moment do you realize that you actually have a lot of crossover tastes?
Probably the first night I was in there, or the second night maybe. The first night was kind of chaotic, as I remember. We got in quite late and blew up a mattress for myself, and I was introduced to George, but we didn't really speak much. And I think maybe it was the second or third night that I was there. I was assembling some IKEA furniture, and George offered me a Budweiser, and we went and sat on the stoop. And I believe we talked about Borges, we talked about postmodernism, we talked about Hemingway, we talked about Faulkner. I believe I asked George who, in a very sort of almost you better not get this question wrong kind of way. I asked him who's the greatest Southern writer, and George said Faulkner, and I was like, that's right. And
damn.
Yeah,
and
years later, we would go to Roanoke.
That's right, and we would go visit Faulkner's house together years after that. So it was I wouldn't describe it maybe as a lightning strike, but it was apparent to me almost right away that this was someone that I was going to get along with, which was relieving since having to spend 2 years in a house with somebody who you don't really like, or even like just a little bit, can be excruciating. So we were very lucky to have found each other.
I know all about that.
Yes, you do.
You know my relationship with Kendra back in grad school, man. Yeah. That was rough.
Yeah, but we got along famously, and it should be said, by the way, that if we lived in a sitcom, our house would have been like the main set. It would have been like Jerry's apartment on Seinfeld. We hosted people throughout the entirety of that program.
That's very true, and which is actually very meta because we would often put on Seinfeld on mute and possess a character, a piece.
Yeah, assign each other a character,
improvise their dialogue. Yeah, those are some good times. That is just a rung below the Star Wars marathon, which actually is my favorite Stillwell moment because
that was so much fun.
We were on the cusp of graduation, and I remember I'd never bought so much weed in my entire life. I think I bought like a half an ounce, and I was rolling a joint like every 25 minutes or something. and we just sat.
You got it from your boy, yeah.
We just watched every Star Wars movie. I think in reverse, right?
Yeah, we started off with Jedi, worked back
in
to
reverse. Oh god, that was masochistic bliss.
Yeah, we just got fucked up and just riffed on the movie and just like made fun of it and quoted lines, and it was a great exercise in like a shared understanding of like what makes certain things funny. Like we all laughed at the same things, and it was one of those things where you feel like your friends like really get you or really understand you. Like we all just kind of had the same sensibility, and it was revealed in watching those movies.
Yeah, I think what we shared most is that we understood the absurdity of existence. Like, whereas like we kind of looked around and we were just like, why don't these motherfuckers find this funny? Like this is, But anyway, yeah, our producers have an excellent idea. We need to go back and say who we were on Seinfeld. Because I kind of forget. I think I was Elaine. Was I Elaine? No,
you were.
George.
That was Devin.
George was George.
George was George. Which come on.
I believe Brian, you had to have been Kramer, because if there's a Kramer at all in our group, it's definitely
That's right.
you.
Yeah, come on. Yeah, that's right. Hold on. What the fuck is wrong with me? And Devin was Elaine, and then you were Seinfeld.
Yeah, which is appropriate.
Katie
Katie wasn't there. I don't believe Katie was there that night.
Oh, Katie. Our producers are saying she was Newman. Oh God. That's too much.
We had a lot of good times at that house. I miss that place.
Yeah, and it probably inspired your collection in absolutely no fashion at all, right?
Oh well.
other than your underlying consciousness.
Well, three pieces that made it into the collection were penned at the desk at that house. In a nutshell, the drift piece, which is about the boy counting the tiles on the chair. And the Suede Head story, which is about the two architects who travel to the Ukraine and are inspecting the building site. So those three pieces lasted from the Sarah Lawrence days, quite surprisingly, actually.
All three of those, which I read. And those were penned in Stillwell, which means inside your serial killer room. I never understood how a grown man could maintain themselves so just
immaculately.
Immaculately, yeah.
The forensic efficiency of a sociopath, but it was beautiful. It made my room look like a tornado had struck.
Yeah, George. Remember when I kissed you? Remember when I was dared to lick your belly button when you passed out?
I do. Yes, yeah.
Oh my God!
I don't remember. You remember, but I recall
Jared,
you informing me about it.
Oh my God!
I do not remember that. When did that happen?
I think that was at the end of our second year.
I have no knowledge of that event.
It was a chaotic time.
Some weird shit went down at that house, but I never heard about that.
Yeah, that was a great night. Too much alcohol in that house, or not enough, or just the right amount. One of those.
Was that the wait? Was that the night that I think I remember that night. I think that was the night that I took your car because there was an event on campus and there was this girl that I was kind of chasing. And I took your car and went to campus, and when I came back, you were just like hammed off the bone, wasted.
I'm all, And
Michaela was sitting in the sink. Michaela was in the sink. Was that night?
That's right. Yeah,
that could have been. There was. Yeah, I think so. But anyway, so yeah, let's get back on track here. Not that we weren't. We were just on a separate track. But I'm shunting. Talk about some of the. Yeah. How shall I shunt? Yeah. So who were like your influences at Sarah Lawrence? professor-wise.
Well, of course, there's our good friend David Hollander. I actually found
who's being well. I have to interrupt
let's
you there
back
and
up.
say that he's going to be our second novel coming out. Everyone should look forward to that. But anyway,
that's right.
David Hollander's the man.
Anthropica.
Yeah, he's like kind of the reason all of us fiction writers like almost like kind of went there. I mean, he's like the reason so many people go to Sarah Lawrence. At least me and Katie, like specifically. But I mean, I know you and countless other people who've gone to Sarah Lawrence's grad program, the MFA program. Pretty much, like, he's almost universally seen as the best professor there,
Yeah, he's
but
definitely...
Though Garth was great, I mean, David has this kind of special ability to connect with students,
He does. Well, David is definitely a magnet for a certain kind of student. I have to confess, I didn't know who David was. I hadn't done any research on him before I went to the school. In keeping with the anywhere but here attitude that I had when I was applying to grad programs, I think Katie said that she read, like, a novel from every single faculty member before she came to Sarah Lawrence.
Yeah, she did, which is crazy to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I read David's book. That might have been the only one I read before. I mean, just because he was kind of the reason I was going to go there. I did.
Yeah, so I confess that I actually didn't read anybody's novels. I barely even sort of glanced at their profiles. Sarah Lawrence was one of the last schools that I applied to. It wasn't until I got there that people started telling me about this guy named David Hollander and how it seemed like we had a lot of things in common and we would sort of jive with each other philosophically and in terms of our taste in fiction. But I didn't take a class with David until the start of my second year. So the first year, the class that probably had the biggest impact on me was Garth Hallberg's class, which was all about dramaturgy in fiction. I have to confess, I was a bit of a pissant when I started at Sarah Lawrence, and I kind of acted
that you were.
Yeah, and I kind of acted like I doubted that there was anything that any teacher was going to tell me that was going to be useful, And
also, my favorite pissant Jared moment is our first semester in Mary LaChapelle's class. And someone, I'm not going to, obviously I don't even want to name names here, but someone's story, remember someone's story? Didn't it start with a dream or something?
Yeah,
and
it's apropos.
I started your story and, it started with a dream and I was just like, and you just put your face in your hands.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you just did that in a workshop.
Well, it was, as I recall, the story began with a character coming out of a dream and then sort of doing a post-game analysis of what the dream could mean. And that just seemed to me like a very bad way to start out a story. And all I could do was muster a groan of discontent.
Can we talk for a minute, like all three of us, just for the benefit of some of our listeners who may not understand what is so hackneyed about beginning a narrative in this way? Can we just discuss real quick why this is inadvisable? Jared, would you like to clarify, given that you were the one that supplied the groan in question?
Well, for starters, I just don't think dreams are very interesting material for fiction. I mean, how many great books have you read that are about dreams? Or how many great books can you think of that have really great dream sequences in them or have any dreams at all in them? There's a few maybe examples. Finnegan's Wake is one long dream, but Finnegan's Wake is impossible to read. Kafka is all dream, but it doesn't acknowledge that it's a dream, which is why it succeeds. It has its kind of own inner logic to it. Nabokov, I think, famously distrusted writing about dreams. Henry James said, tell a dream, lose a reader. It's just not something that is universal. You can't grab onto it. You can't grab onto it in the way that you can with things in our social life. And that's probably why it doesn't succeed in any way on the page, is because it's not universal. It's unique to you. It's what Freud called the polymorphous perverse. It's all your sort of subconscious kinks and quirks and strange affinities and obsessions with holes and phallic structures and things like that. It's not interesting material for writing.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree. All of these things, all of these rules have exceptions, of course, but I always find dreams, more than anything, I generally just find dreams to be boring as shit. And like, you have to be able to really pull it back into a sort of, just like comprehensible narrative, because dreams are inherently incomprehensible. Even dream analysis is just kind of, as fruitful as it can be, it's just incredibly hard work. And to do that work for a book and to make it digestible and like somewhat entertaining, more than just some hodgepodge of meaning, I think it's just very difficult.
Yeah, and
our producers are very intent on providing the example of Fever Dream, which Came out pretty recently, right?
Oh, I haven't
pretty recently.
read that.
Which is an exception, but I generally agree.
Well, there's nothing more boring. There's nothing more boring than listening to someone tell you about their dream, isn't there?
It can be tough.
No.
It can be tough. Yeah. I mean, the significance of it is I think you touched on, Jared, is subjective. So it's so difficult to justify that flight of sort of in narrative fancy within the narrative itself. It's just so difficult to justify why I read that, right? And I accuse certain directors of this a lot. J.J. Abrams being one, that he just does not care. He's going to take you where he wants to take you, and he doesn't care how cheap it is. And that's the thing about dream sequences and the narrative that I find offensive. It's just this cheapening of the present moment in the narrative. I mean, when you talk about, and you see this a lot, I think, in popular fiction and popular TV and cinema, that you have these very well-structured dreams that are then like recurring perhaps to the character, and then they have to go back and figure the significance out. What is so and so trying to? What's my dead aunt trying to tell me about my job as an automotive salesman? Right? Who gives a shit?
or a barn assistant.
yeah. Or a barn assistant. Right? What is my dead dog from the 12th grade trying to tell me about the dangers of being a barn assistant? Just get to the fucking story. Why are we having dreams? I don't believe that. Dreams don't happen like that, right? You have a dream where you've got your pants off in the middle of an auditorium while Abraham Lincoln is given a speech. They're absurd. The brain is not really going about its business trying to help you figure out your life problems. It's not like the brain's not sitting back going, I bet that if I can just get Marilyn Monroe to do cartwheels down Fifth Avenue while they're passing in a prop plane, which is skywriting something about their father, that they'll be able to figure out that they really need to quit their job and find another one, right? The brain doesn't know. It's just nonsense. It's nonsense, and that's why you don't use it in fiction. Don't do it.
Yeah, honestly, and having gone through 3 years of psychoanalysis, I don't need fucking more dreams to analyze on in a book.
Truly.
Yeah, although I should say at the moment I'm reading 2666 by Bolaño, and there's actually a few dream sequences in there that are not bad.
Yeah, I think he does that kind of thing a lot, and sometimes he pulls it off. Sometimes it's I mean, to be honest, Bolaño's one of the biggest things he suffers from is being boring as shit, so it's not really surprising. But yeah, so unfortunately our producers have to hop off in about 10 minutes or so. So we were wondering if, Jared, if you wanted to read like a section out of In a Nutshell, is that possible?
I can. Give me a second to try to call it up. I don't know if that's probably the best story to read from because it's not really self-contained. It's like one long paragraph.
That's true, but
But I can read from.
It's just that we were talking about it,
Yeah,
it would just be nice. You can choose something else if you really feel that desire.
All right, so I have something here. It's not from In a Nutshell because that I can't find something that's self-contained, but I do have an excerpt from another story that I can read if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
So for context, this is an excerpt from a story about a deprogrammed Islamist who is imprisoned in India. Sorry, excuse me, not in India. Is imprisoned in Egypt and is then released, and he de-radicalizes and becomes something of a public intellectual and a force of, de-radicalization in the West.
So no, like are we talking like apostate or still still follows Islam but is not radical anymore?
An apostate.
Okay.
The character was actually loosely based on people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or Majid Nawaz, if anybody knows who they are. And if they don't, I would recommend you look up who Majid Nawaz is or Ayaan Hirsi Ali, because they're great people doing great work that needs to be done. So they're sort of ex-radicals, apostates. This guy's an ex-radical, ex-apostate who becomes sort of a public intellectual in the West. And he's in New York meeting with the editor from the publishing company who's going to publish his memoir. They go to the MoMA together and they look at some modernist art. And then they're going to walk back out down Fifth Avenue. And this is where the passage picks up. And then they were out again on the elm-lined avenue, walking into a light snow, the warm shop windows and diode lights buzzing above. Flags hung from frontage, huge and successive, nodding in the wind. And here again were the winter gatherers, each different from before, but identical, en masse, being pulled into the orbit of the overbright evergreen at the center of the plaza. Around the corner, a different crowd was gathering under the crouching limbs of the bronze Atlas statue. A scaffold was going up around St. Patrick's Cathedral, climbing its spires, crowding its rose window, and making blocks of its Gothic angles, the needle points that knifed the air. But the platforms and steel continued up beyond the structure, so that at least a full story of space above the cathedral itself was occupied with just scaffolding, along with the segment of sky contained between the spires. This lattice, now bound to nothing, seemed to be the next stage in its development, just as it was, so that it was no longer the frame that enclosed the structure, but rather the structure itself, reaching up, describing the sky, and the sea above. This transformation was easily included among the soaring verticality of steel and glass in the surrounding Saks, Olympic Tower, Trump Tower, another building undergoing maintenance before a winter snow. This intersection of idols, inheritance, and symbolism was nonsensically and vertiginously layered. It put into him the familiar angst of homelessness, the absence of a firm place, the reliability of knowing and belonging. But there was no condescension in the feeling, nothing heretical or profane as he would have once described it. The feeling was in fact affirmative, speaking to America's immaculate power of irony and integration, those rip currents of modernity. He considered moving to America many times. Each visit, he thought, would make the induction final. This had always been a model society for those of lost or abandoned faith, as well as those who considered themselves among the chosen and the righteous. Over 800 of these chosen and righteous, the defeated foot soldiers of the Caliphate, would now be returning to the shores of the West, which had failed modernity in this respect. How many would be returning to the American continent? How many had left in the first place? And all the others would be arriving as well, and were arriving at this very moment, dropping into JFK and LaGuardia, nuclear families from all across Arabia and North Africa, those now degraded Hobbesian states that were once named the nursery of civilization.
Very cool. Yeah, I have not read that one yet. I'm super pumped to read that one.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's really good shit. Was that the beginning, Jared?
No, that's somewhere near the end.
Somewhere near the end. Oh, interesting. What struck me most is that you began there, and this isn't the beginning of the story as you just mentioned, but you began there with a very kind of like Jared-esque metaphysical sort of drop in. It kind of transitioned pretty seamlessly into a more internal, like a paradoxically internal but collective sort of view of what's going on with like kind of the general feeling of like Islamic extremism and the as you said, the apostasy, I guess, if that's the word for it.
Apostasy.
Yeah, there you go. I'm really excited to read that. And did you say the title for that? What was that called?
The title of that piece is called The Lovers.
Interesting.
Which, based on that passage, you wouldn't be able to tell from it. The reason for that title is contained somewhere else in the story. It's actually the title of a Magritte painting that I really love.
Oh, that is a good one.
Magritte.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Love it. Yeah, so tell us where we can get your book and, I don't know, any other information that you find pertinent.
Okay, well, the book will be available on March 15th on crowsnestbooks.com, which is my publisher. It will be available exclusively on Crowsnest for about 2 months, and then sometime in the middle of May, it will have a wider release, and it will be available on other platforms like the Zon and bookstores nationwide, hopefully. So if you're looking for it, that's where it's found. In addition to that, I have some journalism and some essays that can be found online as well on websites like 3AM Magazine and Political Animal. At the moment, I'm also currently finalizing the last stages of the contract for an agreement with Political Animal to publish my first novel, actually, Venus in Document. So they're going to run that one as well.
Oh, nice. Whoa. This is news. You kept this under wraps. I didn't hear about this.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that's the right move. I mean, it seemed like the agent wasn't getting it done. although it's nice to have an agent on your side, though, which is good.
Yeah, so the guys at Political Animal are going to publish Venus in Document, the first novel, and hopefully that'll be released in the spring or summer of 2020 next year.
Perfect. Yeah, now you and David can go on tour together.
That's right. Bussing it together.
Fuck yeah. All right, cool. I think we're good, guys. And anything else you guys want to mention? George, what do you got? Give us a progress report on Total Recall 2.
Oh man, I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking more and more about Total Recall 2. The first one takes place on Mars, right? Which is great. It's really good. But I think we got to go further. I think we got to go to like one of the moons of Jupiter, maybe for the next one. And if Arnold's not available, it's going to be tough. I don't know who else we're going to. The easy answer would be Chris Pratt, but frankly, I don't think he could do Total Recall.
Oof.
Right? I don't think he could do it.
Yeah, that's tough.
And I don't think
He's
Jason
kind of
Momoa could
he's
do
a
it
little bit
either.
too sanguine. You know what I mean?
Like he's
just
too
a little
likable.
He's a little blithe.
Yeah, I can't. I want to see a man rip throats. I cannot watch Chris Pratt rip throats like you can watch Arnold Schwarzenegger rip. So I think we're gonna have to de-age him. We're gonna have to de-age him like we've de-aged Samuel L. Jackson and many others. We're gonna have to de-age Arnold and send his ass to Mars again, maybe beyond.
Great. Yeah, no, we'll package that little hot take as a preview for our Total Recall 2 episode.
I still believe we can make it happen. I still believe we can.
Total Recall 2 Part 2, actually, because
I like that.
That's what the our previous episode will be called Total Recall 2.
Yeah, let's do this together.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, let's do this together. # let's do this together.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at Animal Riot Press or Facebook and Instagram under the same name, or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 13th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and featuring George Sawaya and Jared Pollen. Transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
Yes, sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as a fern. I don't know much about Lee.